Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Susan Kelly, President of the City Club. Welcome to a very special presentation today featuring the President of the Planned Parenthood Federation of America, Gloria Feldt. Welcome also to members of Planned Parenthood who are in our audience today. We invite you to add a new dimension to your community involvement and join the City Club as well. Membership applications are on each of the tables and on the information table in the back of the room. Next Friday, May 23rd, there is no program as it's the Memorial Day weekend. So enjoy your weekend and we'll see you the following Friday. Our board host today, seated at the head table, is Coraline Kraft, a member of the Hassan Company Realty Operation, and she will have the privilege of asking the first question of our speaker. Following Coraline's question, we'll open the program to questions from City Club and Planned Parenthood members in the audience. Please line up behind the microphone here before Coraline is finished so that we have time to ask as many questions as possible. Identify yourself as either a member of the City Club or a Planned Parenthood, or of both, as some of my favorite people are here today, and ask your question in 30 seconds or less. Broadcast of City Club programs this quarter is made possible in part by the corporate underwriting of Wells Fargo Bank, Legacy Health System, and Weyerhaeuser Company Foundation. We are very grateful to their support, for their support. Planned Parenthood of Columbia-Willamette is celebrating its 40th successful year serving this region. What began in 1963 as a part-time clinic with a $1,500 budget and all volunteer staff has grown substantially. Currently, there are 7 clinics serving an anticipated 37,000 clients this year, which represents a growth rate of between 20 and 40% over the past few years. 70% of the patients are poor or very poor. 88% receive free or subsidized care. Clearly, it's an invaluable service. Each year, Planned Parenthood health centers provide high-quality, affordable reproductive health care and sexual health information to thousands of Oregon and Washington men, women, and teenagers. This is a small snapshot of the Portland region area, and I know Gloria is going to cover some of the statewide information. I was able to find fascinating detail in their website at www.plannedparenthood.org. Since becoming president of the Planned Parenthood Federation of America in 1996, Gloria Feldt has demonstrated a unique capacity for clarity of vision and courageous leadership. She has set a bold and proactive agenda to advance reproductive rights in the U.S. and globally, and to provide reproductive and sexual health services for all women and men. Feldt is the author of Behind Every Choice is a Story, which was published by the University of North Texas Press in January 2003. It's a blend of personal stories, commentary, and memoir. This book has become a clarion call for everyone who cares about advancing reproductive freedom. And good news, the books arrived. There's quite a few available, and Gloria has consented to stay afterward and sign them. With that, I turn it over to our guest, Gloria Feldt.
Thank you very much, Susan. I am thrilled, delighted, honored so much to be here. I have been looking forward to being with you here at the City Club of Portland for a long time, since David Greenberg, the CEO of Planned Parenthood here, told me about it and told me what a distinguished entity it is and that I really should be here. And so I said absolutely yes. And in fact, this is the second time I've been in Portland in the last couple of months, because we had our annual conference, our national annual conference here just recently. And I know that Portland in general is a city with a history of social activism. Don't know if you know that you all kind of hit a rough patch a few years back. Kind of early in the 20th century, when you threw Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, into the slammer. But, you know, she did a lot of jail time in other places too, so I guess that's okay. You have to kind of wonder how she was so successful in her work, given that she spent so much time in the big house. How in the world was she able to spearhead one of the most important social justice movements in history? Well, I think it's because she was a full-time activist. In 1916, in fact, the very year that the Portland City Club was founded, Sanger opened the first birth control clinic in the United States in Brooklyn. Today, our affiliates, 125 of them in 49 states, soon to be 50, provide reproductive health and education services to about 5 million women, men, and young people every year. It was 1973, another auspicious year, when this club first accepted women to your membership. And of course, that year is also a very important year in the annals of reproductive rights because, any guesses as to what happened in 1973? Roe v. Wade, absolutely. The United States Supreme Court decision that made abortion legal, that recognized a woman's constitutional right to privacy in making childbearing decisions. But you know, a generation has passed since 1973, when everybody, myself included, knew or certainly knew of at least one woman who had died or become infertile or otherwise been harmed because of the fact that abortion was illegal, and unsafe. Today, many people have not known what it means to live life without choice. I want to tell you just a little story, not on that topic specifically, but a story that illustrates what happens when we lose sight of the reality of what's going on around us. And it's really easy to do because we're all such busy people. Buck and Jim were asleep they were camping out one night. Jim woke up and he was just laying there looking up at the stars. And he poked Buck to wake him up. And he said to him, "Buck, look up and tell me what you see." Buck said, "Stars. I see lots of stars." "Well, what do you think that means?" Jim asked. Buck said, "Well, the sky is clear. Probably means we'll have good weather tomorrow." Jim said, "Do you think there might be more to it than that?" Buck said, "Well, I suppose, with all those stars, that there must be other worlds. And maybe somewhere there are a couple of other people who are looking at the stars and thinking the same thoughts that we are." He paused for a minute, and then he asked Jim, "Well, what do you think it means?" And Jim replied, "Buck, you fool, they stole our tent." Well, I am here to tell you today they have stolen our tent. Those who seek to deny reproductive rights have stolen our tent of freedom and justice. And we had better wake up, face that reality, and we'd better start working to get it back. We really don't have time to be pontificating and counting the stars up there in the sky, analyzing what's going on. It's time for all of us to act. And not just those of us who make our living or spend our lives volunteering for this movement, but all people of good conscience. And in fact, that's the majority of Americans who support the fundamental human and civil right to make our own childbearing decisions without government intervention. We do have ample evidence of who stole our tent. Last winter, Planned Parenthood researched and prepared a document that catalogs more than 50 anti-choice initiatives that the Bush administration and our anti-choice Congress have either promoted or promulgated since November of 2000. Just earlier I was talking with some folks here who, and I suspect that many of you saw the New York Times editorial called Bush's War Against Women. And we did provide some of the background material for that, but it was a wonderful, powerful editorial that I think really started to awaken people to what's going on. And a war is just what it is, as much as I hate to use that kind of terminology. Our research on the Times editorial did what really hadn't been done before that, and that is to connect the dots. The thing is that we tend to see these policy initiatives as single individual acts, but they're not. They are a set of initiatives that together form a pernicious web of assaults on reproductive rights and access to reproductive health care. They are not random, they're not isolated, they're not arbitrary, they're not uncalculated. They are intentional, deliberate, and they are dangerous. With great precision and often shielded by the smokescreen of wars abroad and a bad economy here at home, they've waged a war on women that represents a huge, overarching, and a very coherent agenda. It's a strategy in which each issue supports and leverages the other. I'm going to enumerate them for you, and I'm going to start with the one that honestly nobody believes me the first time I say it, because it defies reason. And that is reducing access to family planning and medically accurate sex education. President Bush selected Tommy Thompson to head the all-important Department of Health and Human Services, and Thompson in turn has put abstinence only, and I mean only. I don't mean including abstinence, which of course should always be part of a sex education program. I mean only abstinence, nothing else. Put abstinence only and anti-family planning ideologues in charge of major reproductive health programs. Federal spending on abstinence-only programs will be about $133 million of your tax dollars this year if the president's budget is passed. And personally, I don't know about you, but I call that abstinence of common sense. It also appears that about 1/3 of the much-touted HIV/AIDS funding that's going through Congress right now, you've probably read about that. Apparently 1/3 of those funds that are earmarked for prevention have to go for abstinence only. Preaching abstinence instead of teaching prevention. Personally, I call that cruel and inhuman. President Bush defunded the United Nations Population Fund. $34 million of money that would go to preventing unintended pregnancies and improving women's health around the world, gone. He tried but was rebuffed in his attempt to take contraceptive coverage away from federal employees' insurance plans. Well, next, of course, they are building the platform to outlaw abortion. Just one example, as we speak, the anti-choice juggernaut sweeping Congress is the so-called partial birth abortion ban of 2003, probably the most misrepresented piece of legislation that has ever existed. Because they distrust women as moral decision makers, the United States Senate passed a broadly written ban that would outlaw some of the safest and most frequently used methods of abortion at any time during pregnancy. This draconian abortion ban is also unconstitutional because it fails to have an adequate provision for an exception for the health of the woman. In an effort to call attention to the missing tent in this bill, Senators Patty Murray of Washington and Harry Reid of Nevada, and Harry Reid, by the way, is opposed to abortion rights, but he understands the value of family planning. They sponsored amendments that would have supported family planning initiatives and would have expanded access to prenatal and postpartum care for women. Well, those amendments were rejected. They were rejected by the anti-choice leadership of the Senate. How in the world, I ask you, can senators who oppose abortion justify opposing the very means to prevent the need for abortion? But there's more. Redefining the legal status of the fetus. New child health insurance program regulations bypass the woman and give prenatal care to fetuses, by the way, without adding more money to the program. The fetuses are, in these regulations, redefined as born children from the moment of conception. Right here in Oregon, your anti-choice legislators are working on a state version of the federal so-called Unborn Victims of Violence Act. By charging an offender who harms a pregnant woman with a separate offense for harm to the fetus, These bills create separate personhood status for the fetus, and that's really what they're about, because they pay no attention to the fact that pregnant women are actually much more likely than others to be physically abused. And that if you really want to protect the woman and the fetus, you should have enhanced penalties for abuse against women. Notably missing from any discussion is the welfare of the woman. And in fact, if you think about what happens when the fetus is elevated to a status above that of the woman, a woman and her body become mere vessels. Missing also is any acknowledgement of the moral agency of women. What does it really mean if a fetus has more status than a woman? Who's going to take care of a child if she gives birth? What about that? What is it that she should be able to decide for herself in her own conscience and in her own heart? Perhaps it means that the power and freedom that reproductive rights, from the pill to Roe, have conferred upon women strikes fear into the hearts of some people. You may have noticed that just yesterday in the news, we saw that Governor Jeb Bush appointed a guardian for the fetus of a profoundly disabled rape victim. He expressed no concern for this helpless woman, but took the opportunity to value her fetus above her rights, her health, and her life. And yes, there's more. Packing the courts to overturn Roe. If you're even the most casual follower of the news, you know that some Democratic senators are finally attempting to filibuster just a few of the battalion of anti-choice judges that George W. Bush has nominated. It's a scary litany that includes the renominations, and do notice that I said because they had already been rejected by a previous Senate, Priscilla Owen and Charles Pickering. Owen, in her history, applied parental consent laws much more aggressively than either the law or court precedent required. And Pickering has argued both to abolish Roe and the Equal Rights Amendment. Nominees Carolyn Kuhl and Levinsky Smith also urged the outright reversal of Roe, while nominee James Leon Holmes served as president of Arkansas Right to Life and has written that women should submit to their husbands. But even that's not all. They're even replacing legitimate science with right-wing ideology. One small example, and I could give you many. The administration removed from the Centers for Disease Control websites medically accurate information about the use of condoms to prevent HIV and sexually transmitted infections, and replaced it with propaganda against condoms. The last item on the list I'm going to give you today is censoring free speech. On his very first day in office, which happened to be the 28th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, Bush restored the global gag rule. Not only is this an egregious infringement of free speech and means that many of the most effective international family planning programs will not be able to participate in U.S. government funding, the timing was both cynical and symbolic, setting up a virulently anti-choice agenda that is, and we must realize it is, central and core to this administration. I think it's not like it was sometimes in some previous administrations when reproductive rights issues were kind of used as a political tool to keep the hard right wing of their constituency in line. But I believe they are central and core to this administration's agenda. At the time that he issued the global gag rule, even the so-called, quote, liberal media gave him a pass and didn't call out that the tent had already been stolen. Left unchecked, this pernicious web of anti-choice assaults will absolutely strangle reproductive rights and access to reproductive health care. Without strong action immediately, we will lose this war on women by default. Now, people often ask me, well, why is this happening? We need to note that many anti-choice lawmakers have a blatant contempt of our nation's doctrine of separation of church and state. They've infused their own personal religious ideology, to which they're very much entitled, but they've infused it into our revered democracy and democratic processes, and they want it to be the law of the land. Whenever I hear them defending their position on the grounds that the Founding Fathers infused their own rhetoric with God, I like to remind them that some of the Founding Fathers were engaged in what was then the entirely legal pursuit of slaveholding, and that there were no Founding Mothers, and that even if there had been, they wouldn't have been able to vote. Now, reasonable women and men could argue that whether or not our founders may have been just caught up in the mores of the day. But what is inarguable is that despite their rhetoric, they believed strongly in separating the sacred from the secular, because they wanted to guarantee respect for pluralism and the diversity of opinions and beliefs that exist together in this beautiful, wonderful country of ours. That's not something that we see in the Bush administration or its nominees to the federal benches or in the U.S. Congress today. Earlier this month, I took Senator Rick Santorum to task a bit for his public denunciation of Americans' right to privacy, as set forth in the U.S. Supreme Court decision Griswold versus Connecticut that legalized birth control. As part of a bigoted tirade about gays, which is what got most of the press, and you probably saw that, Santorum also told an AP reporter, it all comes from, I would argue, this right to privacy that doesn't exist, in my opinion, in the United States Constitution. This right was created in Griswold, and now we're just extending it out. Well, I say forced motherhood is a violation of human rights and a violation of the ethical and religious beliefs of most Americans. But hypocrisy does seem to be the common denominator for so many self-righteous ideologues who try to abolish reproductive rights. Interestingly, the truth is that a study by Catholics for a Free Choice found that members of Congress who oppose abortion are more likely to vote against social programs that would benefit children and women and families. And noted political science professor Gene Schroedel found that the strongest pro-choice states spend more per child on foster care, on stipends for foster parents who adopt special needs kids, and funding for poor women with dependent children than do states with the most stringent anti-abortion laws. And of course, our hypocrite for the day would be William Bennett, who gained notoriety for writing the Book of Virtues, and who now can be called the Bookie of Virtues. Now, I suspect that you, I really don't care whether Bill Bennett throws his money away on the one-armed bandit. That's his choice. But we do care about his self-righteous judgment upon the alleged vices and indulgences of others. Now, to triumph over these anti-choice ideologues and to stop Bush's war on women, we must all become activists. I'm not interested, although I think it's important to lay it out for you, in just railing against those who appear to oppose and attack reproductive rights. I'm here primarily to assert a positive vision and an action plan to reclaim our birthright of freedom. First of all, I would invite you to join Planned Parenthood's Action Network, which has the largest activist base of any reproductive rights organization in the U.S., with close to 1 million people right now on it, and our Action Network plan for the near future is to increase that 3 times over. We are mobilizing to win, and we don't just play defense. Indeed, we have a bold agenda to change the climate for reproductive rights once and for all. Our vision for 2025 is summarized by Planned Parenthood's promise to the world: to create hope for humanity, the freedom to dream, to make choices, and to live in peace with our planet. Why such a long-range vision? Well, first, because we have a mission to fulfill. But also, we've learned from our adversaries. It was about 25 years ago that the hard right forces developed a navigation chart to hijack choice, crash land Planned Parenthood, and incinerate our freedoms by taking over the Republican Party, precinct by precinct. I guess you could say that's where the big tent went. They stole it from the Republicans, too. I think that's most unfortunate because I don't believe these issues should be partisan political issues at all. In fact, my years in Arizona, where Senator Barry Goldwater's wife had started the affiliate, taught me well that a true conservative doesn't want the government in anybody's bedroom telling them what to do with their private lives. But the anti-choice movement had been galvanized by the Roe decision. And at the same time, pro-choice supporters had become complacent because they thought they had won the battle. Indeed, the war was just beginning. Roe v. Wade and Griswold before it were top-down decisions that came from the highest court in the land. Now what we have to do is work from the bottom up, mobilizing the grassroots to codify reproductive rights in all 50 states and at the federal level. We must win these freedoms again, one voice, one vote, one person at a time. We also must tell, I believe, a new story about the meaning of choice and tell it in a way by and for a new generation. That's why I wrote Behind Every Choice is a Story, so that today's voices could be heard in 21st century terms, to change the discourse about reproductive rights from the polarized way that we usually hear about it to a humanized, real human story way, and to sound the clarion call to action. We are now designing legislation, a new Freedom of Choice Act. I guess we're defining it too, because I think we have to both define and design this legislation. It will establish federal and state civil rights protections to guarantee reproductive freedom for all women in this country. It may take another generation, and it will be the hardest thing we have ever done, but we will build a new and stronger basis for reproductive justice and freedom. It will provide the foundation that we need for true reproductive freedom and the success of the rest of our bold agenda, which includes things like medically accurate sex education for our young people, contraceptive insurance coverage for everyone. It's just fairness and gender equity. The right and access to abortion services for every woman who needs and wants them. Family planning and full reproductive health care services for all women in the United States and around the world. And emergency contraception access, which, if available to all, would reduce unintended pregnancy and abortion by 1/2. Just imagine. I can assure you that Planned Parenthood will always be the premier provider of reproductive health and education services in the United States and indeed globally. You can count on us to be that provider of choice. Together, we can create real hope for humanity, for women and men and children, real people with real challenges, real dreams, real destinies. And that's how we will together reclaim our birthright of freedom. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gloria. I want to, on behalf of City Club, welcome Planned Parenthood's head. We've had someone else here a few years ago, and at the 40th annual, or at the celebration last night for the 40th anniversary of Planned Parenthood here, I saw many familiar City Club faces. I was on the board of Planned Parenthood so long ago, and other board members with me were Bud Clark when he was just a saloon keeper, and Barbara Roberts when she was just a school board member. Prior to that, though, when I was finishing my degree at University of Oregon, I did my practicum at Planned Parenthood in Eugene, and I was a counselor there. That was in the time, well, Roe v. Wade came into effect. It was in 1973, so now you know how old I am. But that was also before there were early pregnancy tests, and so it was our job as counselors to let the people know whether or not they were pregnant, let the women know whether or not they were pregnant when they came in. There were so many stories that I remember still from those days, and they are heart-wrenching stories in many cases. And I have wondered if the right-wing ideologues consider women to be a faceless mass of ignorant, immoral, irresponsible, and worse, poor women, and don't understand their stories. So I was so pleased to see that Gloria has written a book called Behind Every Choice, There is a Story. But Gloria, I'm wondering how you're going to get it into the hands of people and required reading for people who don't understand these stories.
Well, you're going to help. And I mean that quite seriously. I will tell you just a little story about how I came to write this book and some of the travails of getting it published, and then the even greater travails of getting it actually publicized and out into the world. I was absolutely committed to getting it out in time for the 30th anniversary of Roe, and to make a long story short, the big New York publishers first said, "These books don't sell." And then came September 11th, and none of them were doing anything. There was a small publisher in Texas, not far from where I had been born and grown up, that had heard about it and was pursuing me, and so I decided to go with them. So I have a publisher without much money to market, but that's been very enthusiastic and has been very helpful with it. So I'm relying on friends and colleagues to do what I call guerrilla marketing. And what that means is call your bookstores and make sure they have them. Get somebody to write a review in your local paper, or you write one yourself. I've found reviews popping up in all sorts of odd places that people have just submitted and have gotten published, which has been a really big help. You can write a review on Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com. That helps. You can... some people have been giving copies to their local libraries in their schools to make sure that they have it. And the thing that's been a great surprise and a great, honor to me is that young women, high school age, as well as college age, have really taken to it and have been using it in their social issues classes and for purposes like that. So we just kind of have to get creative. Email your friends, that kind of stuff. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Erwin Mandel, City Club member. You almost answered my question during your initial presentation, but I think it's an issue, but not fully, I think it's an issue worthwhile going back to look at in more detail. The governor of Florida, whose name I always have trouble articulating, has asked a court to appoint a guardian for the fetus of a developmentally disabled rape victim. This is a New York Times article, too. Yes. I mean, where would we all be without the Times? This action would contravene a prior decision by the Florida Department of Children and Families to ask the court to appoint a guardian for the baby only after the woman gives birth. Some of his critics maintain that he is trying to establish a precedent of legal protection for fetuses.
Question, Erwin. Question.
Yeah, but I think you have to understand why I'm asking the question, Susan, no?
Right, we're in a minute.
Okay. However,
she's tough, isn't she?
if you look at it a little more closely, the action is really a thinly veiled attempt to abolish abortion. Think about the ramifications. The Times reports that the ACLU, NOW, and the Center for Reproductive Rights have asked the judge to block the appointment. I didn't see Planned Parenthood listed at that. Has Planned Parenthood decided to join the fray, or are you going to?
Okay, great question. Well, we're in the fray. We're in the fray. There's no question about that. One of the good things about our movement is that there are a number of different organizations, and we work very closely with ACLU and the Center for Reproductive Rights, and sometimes they take a case and sometimes we take a case, and in this instance, they're taking the case. You will find, for example, when the abortion ban legislation passes and is signed by President Bush, which it will be, in a nanosecond, all three of us will be in three separate different federal district courts. And we've all talked together, we know what we're doing, and we collaborate with one another on it. So I think we're just very fortunate that we have many of us to do the job because there's a big job that needs to be done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Justin Gottlieb, City Club member. My question for you is a little bit different. In Oregon, we have the doctor-assisted suicide laws, which the Senate is trying to overturn, and I'd like to know your perspective as the Planned Parenthood in terms of, do you see that as an extension of choice?
Let me just first say that it's not an issue that we have had organizational discussion about and we don't have an institutional position on. But what I will say is that I think there are many issues that are in fact in common, and that when you look at the ethical and moral concerns that are involved, they are very much in common, because in both instances you're dealing with matters of human dignity and choice. But they are obviously opposite ends of the spectrum, and it's not something that we have an institutional position on, so that's about all I can say. Thank you.
Ray Polani, a City Club member. With the population explosion threatening the future of the planet, you are right in saying that we should not have government intervention against the rights of family planning. But I think what we should have is the support and the protection of the government for those planning rights. So the question is, why don't we get going and think of 2004, November, and the election that's coming? This is...
I think you have some support for that.
And I'm suggesting not only the local, but also the national level. And certainly you mentioned the United Nations support for the population planning, etc.
Yes.
This is a local, a national, and a world problem. It's time we become active at the voting.
Indeed.
2004.
Indeed. And if there is one point that I would drive home over and over and over again, is that because of the fact that the court cases that reproductive rights have always relied on for their basis have been so eroded, and because of the fact that for the first time we have a White House and a Congress and many state legislatures and increasingly the federal courts aligned to take away those reproductive rights, it's even more important than ever to be active, every single person to participate in the democratic process and to make your own voices heard and to be involved with other like-minded people. I will put my hat on as president of the National Planned Parenthood Action Fund, which is our political arm, so that I may speak to you in electoral terms and tell you that we have made an organizational decision that for the first time our National Action Fund will be able to get involved in the presidential elections in 2004, and that will be a first for us, and we're going to need everybody's help to be able to do that. And we have long been involved in supporting pro-choice candidates for other offices, both at the federal and state level, but this will be the first time that we have taken that next step. So it's a big step and an important time, and we know that by being able to participate in that process, we will first and foremost be able to elevate these issues in the public's consciousness, force the candidates to talk about them and debate them, and that's just of critical importance because they tend to get marginalized. So thank you.
I'm Roberta Palmer, City Club member. And Gloria, I wonder if you have a strategy for dealing with some retailers like Walmart who might not be willing to stock certain drugs, like maybe a morning after pill in a small town where that's the only pharmacy.
Yes, and it is a strategy that requires constant vigilance, I must tell you that. So sometimes it may be that what I tell you may not be borne out, and we have to, the next time you go to that same pharmacy, and you may have to start all over again. With regard to Walmart, what I do want to say is that we worked with them when we found that many of their, or some of their pharmacists at least, were refusing to fill prescriptions for emergency contraception. Emergency contraception, by the way, is sometimes called the morning after pill. It is nothing more than a high dose of regular old birth control pills with which you're all familiar, which taken within 72 hours after unprotected intercourse can prevent a pregnancy from occurring. And that's what I was talking about when I said that emergency contraception could prevent half of the unintended pregnancies and half of the abortions if every woman had ready access to it. So, it's a very important thing, and public information and public education is a huge priority because so many people don't know about it. When we found out that some Walmarts were not filling those prescriptions, we did have some conversations with the corporate headquarters, and their policy is now that every one of their pharmacies has to either fill the prescription if there is only, if the prescription is presented to a pharmacist who believes otherwise and doesn't feel that he or she can fill that prescription for their own personal reasons, then that pharmacist has to give the prescription to another pharmacist to fill. If there is only one pharmacist in that store, then they are supposed to refer them to another pharmacy. And in some instances, actually, Planned Parenthood has made an arrangement with them so they refer directly to Planned Parenthood if they won't fill it, which is an interesting thing in and of itself, so that a customer can ultimately get what she needs. It's a multi-step process, and we have also found by shopping some of the Walmart stores that sometimes that happens and then sometimes it doesn't. So you have to kind of monitor that. We also are working in some places on policies that would define the matter of who has a conscience in such a way that the conscience of the customer or the patient or the woman or whoever it is that wants the emergency contraception is what comes first. And that's really whose conscience should be considered first. And so there are policy measures that should ultimately be adopted, but until then, shopping those stores and reminding them of what their own policy is, their own internal policy is, has proven to be very useful. Yes?
My name is Ruth Curry, and I'm a City Club member and a longtime Planned Parenthood member. You gave a very good list of some of the people that, of the appointees and the judges that are so anti-choice.
Mm-hmm.
One person you left out, but I'm sure you know about, is the Surgeon General. Has some very bad views, and I haven't seen anything in the Oregonian about it.
This Richard Carmona, the
Yes.
Surgeon General? You know, and maybe afterward you could tell me what information you have. The information that I have is more of a positive nature about him. I don't, you know, this comes from colleagues in Arizona who worked with him over the years, so I think he's a rather flamboyant and unusual individual.
Well, it was some interesting things about his views on sex and also
really?
birth.
Well, maybe you can tell me about them afterward, because I'd like to know what you, and so I can check it out. Thank you.
Gloria,
Hi.
I'm Susan Hammer. I'm a City Club member and I'm president of the local board of Planned Parenthood. I'd like you to explain just a little bit more about the Planned Parenthood Action Network and how people can become part of it.
I would be delighted. There are a couple of different ways that you can do it. And I may need to ask David for a little bit of assistance if there is anything different for the local action network. So let me tell you how to join in general, and then you jump up if I need to add something to it, okay? If you go to plannedparenthood.org and click on the action page, you will be taken directly into a way to sign up to get information on a regular basis, and information about who to contact, how to contact them. It makes it very easy for you. Basically, all you have to do is push a button. You can also pass it on to your friends and colleagues so you can share that information. We have an activist page that is called SaveRoe.com. Which also takes you, basically if you click on the activist page, that's where you'll go, is to Save Roe. So you can go directly to Save Roe if you wish. And those are, is there anything that you would want to add, David?
Good afternoon. I'm David Greenberg, City Club member and Executive Director of this Planned Parenthood. Gloria, you've got it all right for the national. If you'd also like to get local information about what's happening in Oregon and Southwest Washington, Planned Parenthood of the Columbia Willamette has its own website, ppcw.org, and we'll sign you up for the National Action Network, and we'll also make sure that you get information about local things that are going on. And if I may add one more thing to your description of what's happening with Walmart and emergency contraception, because Planned Parenthood of the Columbia Willamette is so concerned about making sure that every woman who needs emergency contraception gets it, we have created on our website, ppcw.org, the ability for women to go to the website, fill out a screening form, and Planned Parenthood will either give you a prescription to your local pharmacy, or we will overnight the medication to you. And every woman in Washington, every woman in Washington and Oregon now has access to emergency contraception, regardless of whether there's a Walmart nearby or not. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, David.
John Wool, City Club member and Planned Parenthood activist. Do you have any information on insurance plans? Are there a lot that will provide Viagra but not provide contraception?
You know, sometimes controversy can be very helpful, and we had been working on contraceptive equity legislation for 2 years and had gotten nowhere when suddenly Viagra hit the scene, and insurance plans jumped to cover it right away, and lo and behold, women got it really quickly. It's like, what? They'll cover Viagra but not birth control? So one of the things that has happened since that time is that fewer plans are covering Viagra, and more plans are covering contraception, by the way. I don't know the statistics. I do know that at this point in time, more plans are covering Viagra than are covering contraception, but it's reaching parity. And one of the reasons it's reaching parity is that our agenda item to get contraceptive equity, to require insurance plans to cover contraception if they cover other prescription drugs, has been very successful. We have passed that kind of legislation in 20 states. We have passed it for federal employees. And now more than half of the women in this country are covered, live in states where that coverage is required. We've also been successful in lawsuits that have established that contraceptive coverage is just basic gender equity. And so that those lawsuits have applied to some large self-insured companies that are not covered by other contraceptive equity legislation. So we see that as one of the big successes, and one of those injustices that hadn't even been noticed. I mean, women were spending 68% more than men out of their pocket on health care, a lot of it because they were having to pay about $300 a year for their own birth control. The most frequently used prescription drug, generally speaking, for women during their reproductive years, gulp. And once identified, people became active very quickly, and in just 5 short years, we have been able to get that much of contraceptive coverage. And I think we'll, in another few years, I think it will be the standard. We're already seeing some insurance plans covering covering it without being forced to now. And so it's going to become, I think, the standard, and I hope that within a few more years we will have passed it in just about every state, and I hope we will have passed it in Congress. We have the votes in Congress to pass the Equity in Prescription Insurance and Contraceptive Coverage Act if the anti-choice leadership will let the bill come to the floor. We have the votes.
May I give a local update on what's happening there?
Thank you.
Would that be all right? Our legislature has not passed the contraception equity bill, and we've tried a few times and have not been successful. We currently have a class action pending in Oregon, Jackie Fitzgerald versus Union Pacific Railroad, and it's brought on behalf of women who are not, pills are not covered by their plans. And it's pending in U.S. District Court right now in Oregon, and we're hopeful that that will be very successful. We'll be able to join the other states that have it required.
Congratulations. That's good.
Ann Bisgeyer, City Club member. Can you update us on what's going on in high schools, and where a lot of times you were dealing with a school board who's, you know, very negative, and what you're able to do to get information out to young teens?
Thank you. A very important question, and one which, again, I will give a national overview, and then if someone from the local affiliate would like to fill in the blanks about what's happening here, that would be great. The not good news at all is that approximately 5% of our schools have a fully comprehensive and medically accurate sex education program. The percentage of teachers in high school who do teach sex education, who say that they now teach abstinence and only abstinence, has increased from 3% to almost 30% in the last 5 years. And that gives you just a small example of what this abstinence-only movement is doing. The consequences that we see from that are twofold. One is that while there is a lot of talk initially among those young people who are in the abstinence-only courses about abstinence, being abstinent themselves, and the value that they see in that, what happens then is that they inevitably at some point, generally in the not too distant future, become sexually active. And when they do, they are much less likely to use birth control or protection against sexually transmitted infections, so that they are actually at greater personal risk and health risk for themselves. The other thing that that has come to my attention recently, as I have spoken on college campuses a good deal in this past year, we have a growing movement of chapters on college campuses, which is a great thing. We have over 100 now that are affiliated with Planned Parenthood. But as I've asked these young people what projects are they going to undertake on their campuses, I have been astonished by how many of them have said to me, we're going to have sex education seminars because our peers are coming to the campus having had only abstinence only, and they don't know anything. And we're worried about them. So it's not a good picture, and it's one of those issues about which we have to ask the question, why is it if 85% of parents want their kids to have sex education taught by their schools, and they want it to be comprehensive and medically accurate, why is it that the schools are not doing that? You hit the nail on the head as you posed your question, which is that the school boards get frightened and threatened by the noisy 15%. And so the other 85% of parents have got to get themselves together, take over the school boards if necessary, and get the kind of education that they really want for their young people. Is there anything locally that you all would want to add about what's happening here? Because I recognize that I am in a state that may be more progressive than those I have lived most of my life in, Arizona and Texas.
You are in a state that is more progressive than Arizona and certainly Texas.
Now,
But unfortunately, the story here is not a lot better than it is around the rest of the country. Our local Planned Parenthood served about 7,700 young people, mostly through school programming during the last year. But what we're still finding is that more than half of the kids in our schools are sexually active by the time they graduate from high school, and most of our children are still receiving an abstinence-only message.
Okay. The one bright note on the horizon may be the opportunity that young people today have to get good information via the web if they know where to go. And so I'll put in a plug for teenwire.com, Planned Parenthood's website, especially for teens, and where they can ask any question they want to ask and have it answered in confidence. And parents are also encouraged to take a little tour of TeenWire to see what's there. And although we do say it's a site for teens, by teens, for teens, so you can look, but, you know, didn't go away. But we do also offer parents a newsletter if they're interested in having kind of some ongoing coaching about how to talk to their kids about this very difficult sometimes to talk about subject.
With the few remaining moments, could you read us a little bit from your book?
Oh, I would love to. Thank you. And before I do that, let me also just tell you that in addition to the fact that Looking Glass Books is here today, and I'm very grateful to them for being here to sell books if you'd like to buy them here, and I'd be happy to sign them, that I will also tomorrow be at In Other Words on Hawthorne, 3734 Southeast Hawthorne at 2 p.m., where I will be reading from the book. So I want to thank you, before I read this story, very much for your attention, for your questions, for your interest. I'm so honored to have been able to be with you here today, and this is a wonderful forum for discussing the important issues of the day, and certainly reproductive rights and reproductive health care is among those critically important current issues. This story may be one of my favorites in the book. It's from a woman named Tracy, who's in her mid-30s, and she's from Seattle. My first baby was due on the 25th anniversary of Roe v. Wade. Throughout my pregnancy, I took every opportunity to tell people my due date and the corresponding anniversary because I was so proud to be able to give birth to a girl, a planned and wanted child, on this very auspicious date. Our city had a multi-faith service to commemorate the occasion, and as I sat in the chapel listening to the service, I felt my first contraction. I whispered to my colleague who was sitting next to me, and she put her hand on my belly to feel the next contraction. Soon I had several hands on my belly, and I noticed tears of joy and excitement in the eyes of a 92-year-old woman, a Planned Parenthood volunteer who had endured an illegal abortion in the 1940s. Anti-choice zealots would like to believe that those who support choice have little respect for the miracle of life. Quite the contrary. It is the respect for life that motivates us. Becoming a mother by choice has cemented my belief in the right to choose whether and when to become parents. I remain forever grateful to those who made my choices possible, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure my daughter gets to keep hers. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. I'm buying 2 copies for each of my daughters. City Club is adjourned.